The mahogany conference table in the presidential suite of the Grand Meridian Hotel gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, its polished surface reflecting the shocked faces of 12 hotel employees, who had just learned their new owner was the same black man they'd spent the morning treating like an unwelcome intruder. Marcus Williams stood at the head of the table in his tailored charcoal suit. The signed purchase documents spread before him like evidence in a courtroom, while hotel manager Patricia Blackwood clutched her resignation letter with trembling hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. "As of 11:30 this morning, I am the sole owner of this establishment, and as my first executive decision, I'm terminating the employment of everyone who participated in today's discriminatory treatment of guests." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of traffic 47 floors below and the soft rustle of careers crumbling like autumn leaves. While Marcus thought about the phone call he'd made just 3 hours earlier, a call that had transformed him from a customer seeking basic human dignity into the man who now held their professional futures in his hands. If you've ever wondered what happens when discrimination meets its perfect storm of consequences, when someone underestimates the wrong person at exactly the wrong moment, then you're about to witness a story that will restore your faith in justice served with precision timing. Hit that subscribe button and join the Acts of Depth family, because what Marcus Williams did after being denied room service will redefine how you think about power, dignity, and the beautiful arithmetic of karma. Marcus had arrived at the Grand Meridian that morning for what should have been a routine business trip, his private jet touching down at the city's executive airport just as the sun painted the skyline in shades of gold and possibility. At 42, with close-cropped hair that was beginning to show distinguished silver at the temples and hands that bore the calluses of someone who'd worked construction before building his tech empire, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned that success was measured not in the heights you reached but in how you treated others on your way up. Williams Industries, his software development company, had grown from a one-man operation in his garage to a global corporation worth $3.7 billion. But Marcus had never forgotten the hunger that had driven those early days when ramen noodles were a luxury and electricity bills were optional. The Grand Meridian was supposed to be his sanctuary for the next 3 days, while he finalized a merger that would create thousands of jobs in the city's tech corridor. He'd specifically chosen this hotel because of its reputation for exceptional service and its commitment to treating all guests with the dignity that Marcus had learned to appreciate after years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated because of his skin color. The suite he'd booked, the same presidential suite where he now sat as owner, cost more per night than many people earned in a month. But Marcus had long ago decided that if he was going to travel, he would do so in comfort that reflected the success he'd earned through 20 years of 18-hour days and relentless determination. The first sign of trouble had come during check-in, when the young desk clerk, a blonde woman named Ashley whose name tag proclaimed her guest relations specialist, had looked at Marcus's confirmation with the kind of skeptical expression usually reserved for obviously fraudulent documents. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see a reservation under that name. Are you sure you have the right hotel?" Ashley had asked, her tone suggesting that someone who looked like Marcus couldn't possibly afford the presidential suite at a 5-star establishment. Marcus had maintained his composure, pulling out his phone to show the confirmation email, the credit card authorization, and the detailed correspondence with the hotel's events coordinator about the private dining arrangements he'd requested for his business meetings. But Ashley's skepticism had only deepened, and she'd called over her supervisor, a middle-aged man named Robert Chun whose expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as he reviewed Marcus's legitimate reservation. "Everything appears to be in order," Robert had said quietly, shooting meaningful looks at Ashley while processing Marcus's check-in with the efficiency of someone who recognized both privilege and the potential lawsuits that came with denying it. "We apologize for any confusion, Mr. Williams. Please enjoy your stay." The presidential suite had been everything the website had promised. 2,000 square feet of luxury overlooking the city's harbor, with a dining room that could seat 12, a master bedroom with a king-sized bed that probably cost more than most cars, and a bathroom featuring a marble soaking tub that could have doubled as a small swimming pool. Marcus had unpacked his bags, hung his suits in the walk-in closet, and settled in to prepare for his first meeting when hunger reminded him that he hadn't eaten since his early morning flight. Room service at the Grand Meridian was supposed to be available 24 hours a day, with a menu that featured everything from simple sandwiches to elaborate five-course meals prepared by James Beard award-winning chefs. Marcus had ordered something modest, a club sandwich, fresh fruit, and coffee, but what should have been a 15-minute wait had stretched into an hour, then 2, then 3, while his phone calls to the kitchen were met with increasingly creative excuses about why his order was delayed. The afternoon sun had shifted position by the time Marcus made his fourth call to room service, its rays now slanting through the suite's windows at an angle that highlighted the pristine emptiness of the dining table where his lunch should have been waiting hours ago. The voice that answered his call belonged to a woman named Sandra, the room service supervisor, whose tone carried the kind of weary impatience usually reserved for particularly difficult children. "Sir, as I explained to the other representative who called, we're experiencing unusually high demand today. Your order will be ready when it's ready." Marcus had spent enough years in corporate boardrooms to recognize the sound of someone who had no intention of fulfilling his request. But he tried one more diplomatic approach. "I understand you're busy, but I've been waiting over 3 hours for a simple sandwich. Could you please check on the status of my order?" "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone," Sandra had replied, her voice sharpening with authority. "We provide service to all our guests equally, and I don't appreciate being pressured. If you're not satisfied with our service standards, perhaps you should consider staying elsewhere in the future." The casual dismissal in her voice had triggered something primal in Marcus, a recognition that this wasn't about kitchen efficiency or high demand. This was about who Sandra thought deserved service at the Grand Meridian. Marcus had encountered this particular brand of discrimination throughout his rise in the business world. From venture capitalists who'd questioned whether he was really the CEO of his own company to restaurant hosts who'd consistently found reasons why tables were unavailable despite obvious vacancies. "Let me speak to your manager," Marcus had said, his voice carrying the quiet steel that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and convinced skeptical investors to bet on a black entrepreneur when such bets were considered risky. Patricia Blackwood had arrived at his suite 20 minutes later, her silver hair perfectly styled and her navy suit projecting the kind of authority that came from 30 years in luxury hospitality. At 57, Patricia had worked her way up from housekeeping to hotel management, but somewhere along the journey, she'd learned to see guests in terms of demographics and profit margins rather than human beings deserving respect. "Mr. Williams, I understand you're having concerns about our room service," Patricia had said, her tone suggesting that his concerns were more about unreasonable expectations than legitimate service failures. "The Grand Meridian has been serving distinguished guests for over a century, and we pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards." Marcus had gestured toward the empty dining table, where afternoon light now illuminated nothing but crystal glasses and fine china waiting for food that would never come. "Ms. Blackwood, I ordered lunch 4 hours ago. I've been told repeatedly that it's coming, but no one seems able to explain why a sandwich requires more time to prepare than most surgical procedures." Patricia's smile had been practiced and cold, the expression of someone who'd perfected the art of dismissing complaints without appearing openly hostile. "Sir, our kitchen staff is quite experienced, and they know how to manage their time effectively. Perhaps there's been a miscommunication about your dietary restrictions or special requests that has complicated the preparation." "I ordered a club sandwich, fruit, and coffee," Marcus had replied, his patience finally beginning to fray. There were no special requests, no dietary restrictions, nothing that should require 4 hours of preparation time. "Well, Mr. Williams," Patricia had said, her tone taking on the kind of condescending patience usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to slow children. "When you're staying at an establishment like the Grand Meridian, sometimes service takes longer because we ensure everything meets our exacting standards. I'm sure someone with your background can understand that quality requires time." The pause before background had been deliberate, loaded with assumptions about Marcus's origins and worthiness that made the insult clear without providing grounds for a discrimination lawsuit. Marcus had encountered this particular form of coded racism before, the suggestion that someone like him couldn't possibly understand the finer things in life, that his success must be somehow artificial or undeserved. "What exactly do you mean by my background?" Marcus had asked, his voice dropping to the register that had terrified competitors and inspired confidence in employees for 2 decades. Patricia had backtracked with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to walk the line between discrimination and liability. I simply meant that not everyone is familiar with how luxury hotels operate. Sometimes guests from different industries have expectations that don't align with our service model. Marcus had stood up from the dining table where his phantom lunch was supposed to have been served, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow across the room as afternoon light streamed behind him. Ms. Blackwood, I think we both know what this is really about, and I think you're about to discover that your assumptions about my background are more costly than you can imagine. The memory that anchored Marcus in that moment came flooding back with crystalline clarity. The summer afternoon when he was 12 years old, standing outside Coleman's corner store with $3 clutched in his sweaty palm, watching through the window as Mr. Coleman served every white customer who entered while pointedly ignoring Marcus no matter how long he waited or how politely he asked for attention. His grandmother, Dorothy Williams, had finally emerged from the beauty shop next door to find him there, tears streaming down his face, still holding the money she'd given him to buy milk and bread for dinner. "Baby," she'd said, kneeling on the hot sidewalk in her Sunday dress. "Remember this feeling. Remember how it burns in your chest when someone tries to make you feel small. But don't let it make you bitter. Let it make you bigger. Someday you're going to have the power to change how people treat others, and when that day comes, you use it right." Dorothy's words had echoed in Marcus's mind as he'd built his empire, one line of code at a time, one impossible deadline at a time, one skeptical investor at a time. She died 5 years earlier, but not before seeing him appear on the cover of Forbes as one of America's youngest billionaires, her weathered hands tracing his photograph with pride that made decades of struggle worthwhile. The picture she'd kept on her mantelpiece showed Marcus accepting a humanitarian award for his company's scholarship program, which had sent over 1,000 underprivileged kids to college, but Dorothy had treasured it most because it represented the boy who'd cried outside Coleman's corner store growing into a man who could ensure other children never had to experience that particular humiliation. After Patricia left his suite with promises to look into his room service order, Marcus had walked to the window overlooking the harbor, where sailboats moved across water that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the afternoon sun. His phone had buzzed with the usual cascade of messages: stock reports, merger updates, meeting confirmations, but one particular email had caught his attention. It was from his real estate team, confirming the availability of a property he'd been considering for months: the Grand Meridian Hotel itself. The hotel had been quietly on the market for 6 months, its owners looking to liquidate assets in a challenging economic climate. Marcus had been considering it as an addition to his hospitality portfolio, but the due diligence process had been moving slowly while his lawyers reviewed the complex ownership structure and outstanding liabilities. One phone call to his acquisition team had revealed that the deal could be accelerated dramatically if he was willing to pay a premium for immediate closure. "How fast can we close?" Marcus had asked his lead attorney, Sarah Chun, a brilliant Harvard graduate who'd negotiated some of the most complex deals in corporate history. "If you're willing to waive the extended due diligence period and accept the property as is, we could have papers signed by this afternoon," Sarah had replied, though her tone suggested she thought Marcus had lost his mind. "But Marcus, we haven't completed the full financial audit, and there are liability issues we haven't fully explored. This would be a very expensive impulse purchase." "Sarah, sometimes principles are worth more than profit margins," Marcus had said, watching a yacht glide past his window while he calculated the sweet mathematics of justice. "Draw up the papers. I want to own this hotel before dinner." While his legal team had worked with laser focus to structure the acquisition, Marcus had begun making other calls. His first had been to the Grand Meridian's corporate parent company, where CEO Jonathan Haraway had been both surprised and delighted to receive a direct offer from one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs. The second call had been to his PR team, warning them to prepare for a story that would likely make national news before the week was over. But it was his third call that had mattered most, to Dorothy's old church, where Reverend Thompson had answered with the warm voice that had comforted Marcus through his grandmother's funeral and continued to guide him through the complexities of success and responsibility. "Marcus, my boy, what can I do for you today?" "Reverend, I need you to remind me what Grandma Dorothy used to say about power and responsibility," Marcus had said, loosening his tie as afternoon stress gave way to something that felt more like destiny than business. She used to say that power without purpose is just noise, but power with purpose can move mountains, Reverend Thompson had replied. She also used to say that when you get the chance to stand up for folks who can't stand up for themselves, you take that chance every time, even if it costs you something. As the sun began to set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Marcus of Dorothy's favorite sunset, his phone had buzzed with the message he'd been waiting for. Purchase complete. You are now the sole owner of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Congratulations, Mr. Williams. The conference room adjacent to the presidential suite had been transformed into a boardroom for justice, its mahogany table now hosting the most important meeting in the Grand Meridian's 107-year history. Marcus had requested that all senior staff be present for an emergency ownership transition meeting, and they'd arrived with varying degrees of confusion and concern, unaware that the man they'd spent the day dismissing and delaying was now signing their paychecks. Patricia Blackwood had entered first, her confidence intact as she assumed she was being called to brief the new owner about problem guests, while Sandra from room service had followed with the weary expression of someone pulled away from more important duties. Ashley from the front desk had arrived last, her blonde hair slightly disheveled from what appeared to have been a frantic afternoon of dealing with increasingly aggressive inquiries from Marcus's representatives about his treatment. Robert Chun sat quietly in the corner, his demeanor suggesting he'd already pieced together enough of the puzzle to recognize the magnitude of the situation they were all walking into. The afternoon light streaming through the conference room's windows cast long shadows across faces that were about to experience the kind of career-defining moment that business schools would eventually study as a case study in the consequences of institutional bias. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus had begun, standing at the head of the table while his lawyer Sarah Chun flanked him with a briefcase full of documents that would reshape their professional lives. Thank you for joining me on such short notice. I'm Marcus Williams, and as of approximately 30 minutes ago, I am the sole owner of this hotel. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded earthquakes, heavy with the potential energy of worlds about to shift. Patricia's face had cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as she realized that the problem guest she'd been dismissing all afternoon was now her boss, and had witnessed firsthand her approach to customer service. There seems to be some mistake, Patricia had said, her voice barely maintaining its professional composure. Mr. Williams, I was told the new owner was a corporate acquisition firm based in New York. Williams Industries is indeed based in New York, Marcus had replied, his tone carrying the weight of $3.7 billion in annual revenue. And I am Williams Industries. But we're not here to discuss corporate structures. We're here to discuss the culture of discrimination that I experienced as a guest today, and the changes that will take effect immediately. Ashley had been the first to break, her voice cracking with the stress of sudden understanding. Mr. Williams, if there was any confusion at check-in, I can assure you it was just a miscommunication. Sometimes our computer system— Ashley, Marcus had interrupted gently. There was no computer malfunction. You looked at a black man with a reservation for the presidential suite and assumed he didn't belong here. You questioned legitimate documentation, called over a supervisor, and treated me like a potential fraud until the evidence became overwhelming. The afternoon sun had shifted again, now illuminating the documents spread across the table like evidence in a trial where the verdict was already decided. Sarah Chun had opened her briefcase, revealing termination letters that had been prepared with the same efficiency that had closed the hotel acquisition. Mr. Williams, Robert Chen had spoken up, his voice tight with the recognition of someone who'd seen the writing on the wall. I want to apologize for any service failures you experienced today. The staff is generally very professional, and I'm sure today was an anomaly. Robert, you were the most professional person I encountered today, Marcus had replied, his memory returning to the man who'd quietly corrected Ashley's discrimination without making a scene. Which is why you're not receiving a termination letter. In fact, I'm promoting you to general manager, effective immediately. Robert's shock had been visible, but it was nothing compared to the devastation spreading across Patricia's face as she realized that her 30-year career in hospitality was about to end because she'd chosen prejudice over professionalism when it mattered most. Patricia, Marcus had continued, his voice carrying the weight of every slight he'd endured and overcome. "For hours ago, you stood in my suite and suggested that someone with my background couldn't understand quality service. You're about to discover that my background includes enough resources to buy this hotel in a single afternoon, and enough judgment to recognize employees who've forgotten that hospitality means treating all guests with dignity." The termination letters had been distributed with surgical precision. Patricia for discriminatory management practices, Sandra for refusing service based on bias, Ashley for profiling during check-in, and 3 other staff members who'd been identified through security footage as participating in the coordinated effort to ignore Marcus's legitimate service requests. "But sir," Sandra had protested, tears beginning to stream down her face, "I've worked here for 8 years. I have a family, a mortgage. You can't fire me just because of one misunderstanding." Marcus had looked at Sandra with the expression of someone who'd learned that empathy didn't require enabling. "Sandra, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. You chose to deny service to a paying guest based on assumptions about his race and worthiness. And now I'm choosing to ensure that no future guest experiences what I experienced today." The setting sun painted the harbor in shades of gold and crimson as Marcus stood alone in his suite. Now truly his suite in every sense, watching the last of the terminated employees clear out their belongings through the window 47 floors below. The transformation of the Grand Meridian had begun immediately, with Robert Chun proving himself worthy of his sudden promotion by implementing new policies with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting years for the chance to lead with integrity rather than simply follow orders. Sarah Chun had remained to finalize the paperwork, her earlier concerns about the impulsive purchase giving way to admiration for what she now recognized as a masterclass in using wealth as a force for justice. "Marcus, the media requests are already coming in. CNN, NBC, Forbes. Everyone wants to know about the billionaire who bought a hotel to fire racist staff. How do you want to handle this?" Marcus had poured himself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher that room service had finally delivered, along with a personally prepared dinner from the head chef, who'd been horrified to learn about the treatment Marcus had received and had insisted on preparing an elaborate meal as an apology. "Sarah, let's tell the truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with money is use it to prove that actions have consequences." The local news had picked up the story first, with reporter Jennifer Martinez conducting an interview in the hotel's lobby while new staff members, hastily hired from competing hotels with promises of better wages and respectful management, worked to reset the culture that had taken root under Patricia's leadership. By morning, the story had gone national, with hashtags like #RoomServiceJustice and #GrandMeridianRevenge trending across social media platforms. But the real vindication had come in the form of calls and emails from other guests who'd experienced similar treatment at the Grand Meridian over the years. A pattern of subtle discrimination that had driven away business and damaged reputations while enriching shareholders who'd turned blind eyes to systemic bias. Marcus had established a guest relations hotline where people could report their experiences, and the stories that poured in revealed a culture of discrimination that went far beyond his own encounter. 6 months later, the Grand Meridian had been transformed into a model of inclusive hospitality, with diversity training mandatory for all staff, community outreach programs that provided hospitality job training for underserved populations, and a guest satisfaction rating that had soared to the highest in the city. Robert Chun had proven himself to be exactly the kind of leader the hotel needed, implementing policies that treated dignity as non-negotiable and service as a privilege to provide rather than a favor to grant selectively. Patricia Blackwood had struggled to find employment in the hospitality industry after word spread about her termination for discriminatory practices, while Sandra had eventually found work at a budget motel where her prejudices were less likely to damage premium customer experiences. Ashley had used her experience as a learning opportunity, enrolling in diversity training courses and eventually finding employment at a company that valued the kind of growth that comes from confronting one's own biases. The presidential suite had become Marcus's regular accommodation whenever business brought him to the city, but he'd also opened it periodically to scholarship recipients from his educational foundation. Young people who might never have imagined staying in such luxury, but who deserved to experience excellence without prejudice. On a particularly meaningful evening, he'd hosted Dorothy's old church group for dinner, serving them in the same dining room where he'd once waited hours for a sandwich that never came. As Marcus prepared to leave after his latest stay, He'd found Robert in the lobby, reviewing guest feedback with the meticulous attention that had made him such an effective leader. "Mr. Williams, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity. This place feels different now, like we're actually serving people instead of just processing them." Marcus had shaken Robert's hand, remembering Dorothy's words about power and purpose, and recognizing that the true victory wasn't in buying the hotel or firing the discriminatory staff. It was in creating a place where future guests would never have to experience what he'd endured. "Robert, you've proven that good leadership can transform any organization. The hotel isn't successful because I bought it. It's successful because you're running it with integrity." The final image that would stay with Marcus was the sight of the hotel's new guest relations specialist, a young black woman named Keisha who'd been hired through the community outreach program, greeting an elderly black couple with the kind of warmth and respect that should be universal but often wasn't. They were checking in for their 50th wedding anniversary, and their faces glowed with joy at being treated like the honored guests they deserved to be. The Acts of Depth family knows that sometimes the most powerful responses to discrimination aren't protests or lawsuits, but the quiet revolution of using success to create the world we want to live in. If Marcus's transformation of humiliation into hospitality inspired you, share this story with someone who needs to remember that dignity isn't negotiable and respect isn't a luxury item. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and remember, when someone shows you who they are, believe them but also show them who you are. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so much better that their narrow vision becomes irrelevant, and their lost opportunity becomes someone else's deserved chance.